Hello everyone, Pastor Howie here with another look through the Gospel of John. We are coming to a new chapter. We finished chapter 11, which dealt with Jesus and Lazarus and Martha and Mary and the events surrounding Lazarus' illness and death, and Jesus manifesting his power over death by raising Lazarus. And it concluded with a section dealing with the plot by the Pharisees and the Jews to kill Jesus because he was becoming more and more of a threat and they wanted to get rid of him. Sometime between the end of chapter 11 and the beginning of what we're going to read today in chapter 12, verses 1 through 11, some time passed. We don't know how much, but as we go through this reading in this video, we discover that Jesus is back in Bethany at the home of Lazarus and Martha and Mary, and that it is the beginning of his last 6 days on this earth before his death on the cross. And so we continue our readings and thoughts through the Gospel of John. Today, in this video, looking through John chapter 12, verses 1 through 11, Jesus anointed at Bethany. So, John tells us 6 days before the Passover, okay, and Jesus attended Passovers all his life. And as Messiah, he attended Passovers for the 3.5 years that he ministered after his baptism. This is the last one that he will attend. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived. John points out where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, which was, John describes, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. So she provided the kind of service to Jesus that the lowest of the servants would do, washing his feet, but she did it extravagantly with this perfume that she apparently had saved up, and didn't use a towel to wipe his feet. She used her own hair. So this is a distinctly exultant and extravagant act of worship on her part. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So this dinner was given to honor Jesus. I don't believe that Lazarus and Martha and Mary knew that Jesus was on his way to be crucified. I don't know that they understood that. I know the disciples certainly didn't understand it. They didn't even understand it after it was all over. Until Jesus proved his resurrection to them. And so this was just to honor Jesus. We are already told in chapter 11 how much Jesus loved Lazarus and Martha and Mary. They were friends. They'd had previous contact and developed this relationship of friendship. And so here he is. He's coming back. He's headed to Jerusalem. He's headed to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. I don't think they really knew that he was going to die at Passover. Maybe they had some insights, we don't know. But they obviously honored him coming back to Bethany to visit them. So that's all great and glorious. And there's all kinds of controversies. Not all kinds of controversies, but there is controversy over where Mary got this expensive perfume. Was she indeed the same Mary who in the other Gospels is described as a former prostitute, who also anointed Jesus body with expensive perfume? Is this the same Mary? Some people say yes, some say no. We're not told exactly. But we do know this. Whatever the background that brought Mary to have this expensive perfume, whether or not she had been a prostitute, we don't know for sure. We can assume one way, we can assume the other, we can make presumptions, and all we're doing is thinking beyond what the scriptures here tell us. But what we do know is, whatever the situation was in this relationship, Mary poured out at great expense a very humble offering to Jesus, washing his feet and wiping off the ointment with her hair. But one of the disciples, verse 4 tells us, one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Now remember, John's writing as an eyewitness, and so he adds a few details. He's not just doing a narrative, but he's adding a few details as he tells us what happened at the house of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. And here we see Judas objecting to what he had witnessed. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? Sounds like a legitimate and righteous complaint, perhaps. It was worth a year's wages, so we know how expensive that perfume was. He did not say this, though, John tells us in verse 6, because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And again, this is John reflecting back on Judas Iscariot and giving us information about it. John doesn't tell us how he knew these things, but obviously he was one of the disciples, and he knew that Judas is the one who betrayed Jesus, and it probably was discovered later on that he'd been embezzling money from that which was donated to help Jesus and his disciples move from town to town and perform the ministry they performed. Interestingly enough, Judas was graced with the same powers and the same abilities that the other 11 were when Jesus sent out the 12 to preach the gospel, to heal the sick, and to cast out demons. And so his betrayal of Jesus makes it that much more sorrowful. And his complaint is certainly not a righteous complaint. It is a mask of hypocrisy and a self-interested desire to take in 2,000, a year's worth of wages for this expensive perfume and be able to embezzle some more. He was a dark person. He was a betrayer. He was a hypocrite. He was a false disciple. Even in the midst of Jesus calling 12 disciples, he called one who proved to be a false disciple. There are many false disciples, and this is only an example of the fact that someone can appear to be close to Christ, whose heart is far, far away. As Isaiah said, he complained about Israel, and part of the indictment he brought in his prophecy about Israel was that God said through Isaiah that you are a people of unclean lips. You profess your allegiance to me with your lips, but your hearts are far removed from me. So, Jesus responds, "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial." I don't know that Mary knew that ahead of time, but Jesus had the insight. Jesus is God with us, Emmanuel, God the Son, fully human, fully divine, and fully the Son of God from eternity into eternity. So he knew all things. And so he tells Judas, leave her alone. This was planned. It's part of the plan. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. So he's giving them some more insight into what's going to happen at the end of this week, 6 days before the Passover. You will always have the poor among you. And he's quoting from Deuteronomy, let me just look again, Deuteronomy 15:11, when he says those words, but you will not always have me. Again, giving them some insight into what's about to happen in just a few days. But then we have this notation from John in verses 9 to the end. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Remember, there were a large group of people at the tomb when Jesus raised Lazarus. These people remembered. They probably told others. And so here are people coming back to see Jesus and others coming to see Lazarus, who they had heard had been raised from the dead. Maybe had witnessed that. Jesus was a man of quite famous notoriety at this point in Bethany. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him, and the chief priests were jealous. They were afraid. They were going to lose their position. They were going to lose their power. They didn't want anything to do with Jesus. They wanted him out of the picture, erased, if you will, from history. And they wanted to erase any evidence of any works he had done. So they plotted to kill Lazarus as well. Whether or not they succeeded, we don't know. Scriptures don't tell us. However, we do know whether Lazarus was executed, martyred, or just died of natural causes. He was not raised to not die again. But someday, when Jesus comes again, having defeated death, having been raised from the grave himself, never to die again, we and Lazarus and Martha and Mary and all those Jews who believed in Jesus and all the Gentiles down through the ages who believe the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ for their sins and justification will experience life everlasting in resurrected, transformed bodies. And so that's what I have for you today. May it give you hope. May it give you encouragement. May it give you wisdom and discernment. And till next time, have a good day.